After becoming Prime Minister of India, when Indira Gandhi went on a visit to the United States, the headline of one American newspaper was "New Indian Leader Comes Begging." It was the time when India was struggling with a food crisis. The situation has completely turned now, and it is the United States who is begging India. Namaste, welcome to TFI English, National Socio-Political Analysis arm of the TFI Media Group. I'm your host Apurva, and if you're watching us on Facebook, give our page a like. And if you're watching us on YouTube, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Coming back to the story today, in this video, I'm here to tell you how US is begging India for cheap oil. A Finland-based research group, the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, has revealed that in spite of heavy sanctions on Russian exports, the United States and Australia continue to receive Russian oil via refineries on the Indian subcontinent. The Energy Research Group has stated that since the Ukraine war, India's imports of Russian crude oil have exponentially risen, and many of those barrels were re-exported as refined products to countries including the United States and Australia. Comparing the refining spending expenses, the research group stated that India's purchases of Russian crude soared. The spending by Indian refineries on Russian oil also surged from negligible before February 2022 to over $10 billion now. The reports also made an interesting revelation that despite the heavy sanctions on Russia, the European bloc remains the biggest buyer of Russian crude. With a whopping $124 billion, Europe topped the list of Russian crude buyers, followed by China at $51 billion and Turkey at $16 billion. Reports suggest that in 2021, the United States imported about 8.47 million barrels per day of petroleum from 73 countries, out of which crude oil imports were around 72% with 6.11 million barrels per day, and refined petroleum accounted for about 28%. It is also important to note that the United States exports around 12.1% of world's refined petroleum, worth $84.9 billion. Despite being the world's top refined petroleum exporter, why is the United States buying oil from India? The question has a multi-layered answer. After the heavy sanctions on Russia, the demand for Gulf crude skyrocketed in the regular market. Also, due to the sanctions on Russia, the Europeans were left with Gulf countries for importing crude oil. Already devoid of Venezuelan and Iranian crude oil prices were soaring. In this scenario, crude oil became costly, and as true capitalists, Americans started searching cheap oil, and Indian oil refineries acted as the saviors of USA. India is the world's third largest refined petroleum exporting country. With $54 billion, India accounts for 7.7% of the world's export volume. According to the data from the Oil Ministry's Petroleum Planning and Analysis Cell, 3/4 of the total refined petroleum exports are diesel and petrol. As the world's third largest oil-consuming and importing nation, India has one of the best petroleum refineries. The companies leading the refinery of petroleum products are IOCL, Reliance, HPCL, BPCL, Naira Energy, and ONGC, among others. As domestic refiners export these petroleum products at globally sky-high prices, the cheap crude oil from Russia helped the domestic refiners to export them at highly remunerative prices. In this scenario, Indian refined petroleum became cheap and competitive in the international market. Having said that, the global market runs to buy refined oil from India, and so does the United States of America. In June 2022, an analyst at the Center of Research on Energy and Clean Air, speaking about Reliance's export of refined oil to the US, said what likely happened was Reliance took on a discounted cargo of Russian crude, refined it, and then sold the product on the short-term market where it found a US buyer. This is a total double standard of the US, which on one hand preaches the world to not import the Russian oil, and on the other secretly buys the same refined oil from India. Conveniently shielding itself from the sanctions, America convinced Europe not only to sanction Russia, but also cut the energy imports. This resulted in complete collapse of the economic system of Europe. The COVID lockdowns have already shattered the backbone of the European economy, and reducing energy imports from Russia has brought them to the brink of civil war. As a result of hefty sanctions, Russia has nearly shut down its gas supply to Europe, making it harder for Western countries to sustain in the economic disaster. Due to Russia's gas embargo, European countries are finding it difficult to identify alternative supplies of Russian gas. The recurring effect of rising energy prices is reflecting in essential commodities prices. Inflation is at an all-time high, unemployment is rising, the GDP rate is stagnated, and Europe's economy is in shambles. Furthermore, hit by one of the biggest droughts in 500 years of Europe, the crisis is further going to multiply. In a way, leaving Europe in crisis, the United States of America is enjoying cheap Russian oil via India. The same plan as EU was made for India, they were constantly pressuring India to cut off the cheap Russian oil. But though rightly rejecting the proposal of the US, India followed the nation's interest policy and secured energy for its people. Moreover, India is also giving arms to the United States in the face of cheap refined oil.